Hello everyone, welcome to today's panel discussion. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from around the world. My name is Chris Rainey, co-founder here at HR Leaders, and I'll be your host for today's discussion where we're talking about how to drive business agility and data literacy in HR to plan for an uncertain future. With all that being said, let me introduce you to our panelists. We're joined by Charu Maini, Chief People Officer at Flutter Entertainment, Sofia, Vice President of Strategic Workforce Planning and Transformation at SAP, Brian Dames, Chief Strategy Officer at Safeguard Global, and Deepak Parija, Vice President and Chief of HR Global Markets at Wipro. Welcome, everyone. How are you all?
Doing great, Chris.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Nice to have you all with us, and for the fourth and final installment of this series. So what a great way to end it. I say the end, we're still going to get back together at some point, so it's not completely the end, so don't get sad, everyone. For those that are new, Brian, if you could just take a second for those that are new and it's the first time joining, to make a quick introduction to Global Fluency. What is it and why does it matter in today's global market?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And thank you for your partnership. We really enjoyed this series. I consider it a chapter. So we got a chapter ending, but not the book, right? So, and thank you to the panelists. Very excited to have this discussion. So very quickly, Global Fluency. So Safeguard Global, we work with hundreds and hundreds of multinationals, and we're constantly innovating and thinking of new ways to drive value for them and really draw on our experience with all those multinationals. So, we thought, wouldn't it be interesting if we had a standard way or a standard framework to comment on multi-channel proficiency and the way that multi-channel organizations employ globally, manage their workforce, grow over time. We embarked on that journey about a year ago, and we studied 250 multinationals, and we found that there are really three main components that drive proficiency for multinationals, and we've covered these in the panel series. So encourage anybody to go back and view some of the other ones. But quickly, the three components. The first one is what you know about the markets that you're in and the markets that you want to be in. So as we know, employing in various countries can be very complex. There are cultural nuances, currency translations that have to take place, employment law that has to be considered, tax regulation, social cost, available talent. That's all very complex, and you need, all multinational organizations need to know a lot about the regions and countries they're employing in to do it effectively. The second component we found is what you do with that information. So how accessible is all of the things that I talked about, which ultimately are represented in some sort of data that has to be consumed by the organization. What's the accessibility of that data? How's that being distributed in the organization? And then how is that decisioned on? And then the third piece is what we're going to talk about today, which is what we call agility. So, you have the information that you need to employ in the countries that you're in and that you're considering. You have the accessibility to that data. How are you actioning on that data? How available is it in the moments that you need it most? And I think we've all, in the past year, experienced maybe the biggest global trend that we've had to react to as HR practitioners. And really, we were tested on how agile we were able to react to that situation. Those three components together make up what we call Global Fluency, which is really a framework that describes the proficiency of multinationals. So we'll be talking about that third one, agility, today.
Fantastic. Well, to jump back in there and kick off the conversation, Brian, could you share some of the kind of research that around agility that you've learned over the last sort of 12 to 18 months? Yeah,
it's really interesting. I mean, so if we take it within the context of COVID, right? So that like I said, a massive global trend that we've all had to react to. I think all of us as organizations, we had first had to react tactically to that impact, right? There were so many unknowns. We had no idea how big, what the global impact was going to be on the global community, so our employee base, but then also on our organization. So there was a financial impact. So we had to react to that very tactically. How do we get people enabled to work from home if they weren't before? What do we need to do from a planning perspective? So a lot of scenario planning I know that we did nearly a year ago, and figuring out, making assumptions about what we thought the global impact would be. As time goes on and you learn more about the situation that you're in, you sort of ladder up strategically in how agile you are in reacting to COVID. So what we've seen in the research, and it's interesting when you apply it to a situation like COVID, we did the research pre-COVID, but when you talk to, small companies, mid-level companies, enterprise companies, they all rank in importance at the top of the list. The tools and technology to get access to the data that I was talking about, having access and distribution of that information, and then having skilled people that can actually access the information to be able to react to things like COVID. But when you layer on how they match their proficiency against how they rank those things in importance, 90% and more of those companies say that those things are important. But when you look at enterprise companies, less than 50% say they're actually proficient. So it's a recognized need, but very few companies actually fulfill on it, less than 50% at the enterprise level. And more interesting, mid-tier, they cite the biggest challenge that they have is a lack of plan to grow globally. So what we're seeing is there's a recognized need, maybe not the best planning at the mid-stage growth level, and then there's a loss of focus when you get to the enterprise level, because there's a recognize that there's a need, and then maybe as a company grows, they sort of devalue the importance, maybe unknowingly, of having the right information, accessing that information, having the skills to act on it.
Frank, Deepak, Charu, is this something that you can all relate to within your own organizations and previous ones that you've worked within?
To me, it's a culture. It's about habit that one has to sort of be able to pick that up, and to a large extent, it's really about having a mindset to be able to listen to the data. There is a lot to do in terms of analytics and information that is available, and insights that come across out of it. But there's a lot to do in terms of leadership and managers' willingness to actually act on that data. And that sort of brings us to the other point. I mean, one is acting on that. The second is the speed with which one is able to act on it, because I think the interesting point that's brought out in the last 1 year, and all of us worldwide, countries and organizations and communities have come across to a situation to believe that all the data and everything that probably each of us had was sort of in question. One had to then very, very quickly pick up information real time, process that, democratize that across to sharing it across worldwide teams and people that are there. And primarily not because of anything else, we'll come to the business dimension of it, but very, very clearly just pure and simple health and safety and well-being of all our people. So the ability to be able to work on it and act real time with speed is a very critical element. But that also goes back onto the aspect of how do you build a culture about utilizing that. I mean, how do you build a culture of data literacy across? How do you build a culture where it is all pervasive and on a sustainable basis getting used across it? So I completely agree to some of the insights that's coming across, and I think that's homework yet to be done.
I would agree with you, Deepak, and I think the comment you made on culture is incredibly important. I think every organization is rapidly trying to become what I'll call an intelligent enterprise, which is how do we rapidly turn data into insights? And I love your point on culture, certainly an important point for us, and I think it starts with building a culture of curiosity. Listening to the data is one, but you absolutely need to listen to the customer as well and understand their business or your business, if you're internally focused in HR, where you're trying to go, what you're trying to accomplish, and then obviously aligning the data to those real world business problems. I really liked your point. I think it struck home for me.
The biggest challenge we've seen across all segments, so we measured sort of small companies, and this is by the Gartner definitions of company size, small, mid-tier, enterprise. By far, the biggest challenge faced at every level was managing culture per country and integrating that with corporate culture. It's a huge challenge, and it just shouted out in the data, which I thought was really interesting. I have a question for the panel. I wonder, how are you all managing sort of that transition from tactical response to COVID to now moving more strategic? So what we've seen with clients is, at first it was, reacting very immediately and logistically to, like I said, getting people working from home. And now there's sort of this organic evolution in what global employees value and how they believe they should be able to interact with their company, their expectations on the mix of work from home versus, going in the office. And I think everybody's sort of starting to rethink what their sort of space footprint needs to look like, how flexible they need to offer employment options to their employee base. I wonder how much that is impacting all of you, and how you're having to move, sort of strategically to react to COVID, the changing expectations, and then what the underlying data is that you need to actually respond.
Yeah, maybe I'll take that one. You're absolutely right, Brian. I think from very early on, we were definitely in tactical mode for the first few months. Like, how do we get people settled? How do we get them comfortable? How do we keep a pulse on how they're managing through that? So coming back to health and well-being. But now our focus has shifted significantly, and it's definitely more into now, how do we think strategically about how we're accessing new talent pools? What's our location strategy? What's our compensation structure as a result of the talent migration that's occurring? Obviously, we're thinking about how do we ensure we keep people engaged, right? It was great to make that transition into the virtual world, but now how are we measuring productivity and keeping a pulse on the organization, using experience management technology like Qualtrics as an example for us to really keep our pulse on the people, if you will. I think the other big shift for us too is, if you look externally from a talent perspective, the war on talent has heated up, right? I mean, There's no longer geographical boundaries, right? That really I think help set some of our strategies, and so we're totally rethinking our model and rethinking the way we work, and I think it's going to continue now for quite a few years as we start to rethink our business models and break into new markets.
Yeah. So just adding to what Frank said in terms of how we're getting ahead of the curve is also in terms of thinking about what's our point of view once things do get back to normal, right? Do we want employees to come back into office full time like things were earlier, or do we want employees to have sort of 60-40 or 50-50, whatever ratio that is, or the other way? So I think we are also internally now debating, because we can see a scenario where once vaccines are available across the world, that there is some sort of an end to this. Albeit different locations will have different readiness to it. But I think so we are developing our point of view in terms of how much do we want to come back into the office. And of course, there are different dynamics of different parts of the business, right? In retail, we have a retail arm, for example, and in retail, you don't have choice from working from home. So, what does it mean in the retail part of the business? What does it mean in other parts of the business?
I was going to throw in, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this. So as part of the Fluency platform, we can do assessments for companies where we kind of measure their proficiency and then compare that to the benchmark, either the whole data set or their industry data set. And we've done some work with some companies that have been really interesting, because we can chart based on sort of the increase in global reach that they have, where they're going to, where they employed 5 years ago versus where they employ now, or versus where they're going to employ in 5 years. And then sort of marrying that with programs they have underway in their organization. And what we've seen is there are companies that are creating competitive differentiation in the way that they employ, and tapping into those talent pools, but also providing the flexibility for their current employee base to maybe move to a different country, to have different stints in different countries over periods of time. And it's creating a differentiator for their employer, sort of their employment brand. And I think that's really interesting, that not only are they trying to just evolve and become better, but they can actually build competitive differentiation against the companies that they're competing with for the same talent.
Just responding back on that, Brian, absolutely, and I think can't emphasize the point more. I mean, just to give you a little quick, data point on that. When we wanted to start off reach back to our employees, one realizes that many of them actually have gone ahead and moved on to their home locations. That's a very simple human behavior to be able to find ways to respond back, and everybody has their own way to deal with it. And there are families that they have to contend with. Now that's fine, because to a real large extent, there are people working from their own home. However, the issue is to be, for us as a large enterprise, to be able to reach across to them, make sure that they're safe and taken care of. At the same point of time, we will continuously be able to respond back to our customers. And to that extent, even if we had to have a whole logistical plan process in terms of shipping laptops, moving across, security aspects that's got to be taken care of. So the whole process is about how do you make things happen, and look at the data, look at the information that's coming across with, and act on it. I absolutely agree, and I'm sure Frank will have enough and more suggestions and observations very similar to that, right? I mean.
Yeah, I think the point you mentioned, Brian, I think Charu was trying to mention it as well, is this COVID has presented a real opportunity for us to really rethink, obviously, our location strategy, et cetera, which you talked about, but we're starting to think about leadership development and what that looks like, and how do we rotate talent differently across the organization now that geographic barriers aren't as defined as they once were, right? We're thinking about how do we recruit talent, where do we recruit talent, obviously, but trying to rethink our business processes around that and go to a completely virtual environment, and take a page out of some of our high tech partners, right, who are really rethinking and have redefined talent acquisition. So we're using this now, I think, as a springboard to really rethink how we attract, develop, and grow talent. And leadership development was one example, but there are many others, as Deepak mentioned.
Yeah, just to comment there, one more, as an example, large organizations across, and I'm sure many of them have taken steps to respond back onto the various government subsidies that got put into place, right? Furlough programs, and you name the country, governments have put in stimulus and furlough programs and whatnot. But what it also means is that the ability to be able to contain and retain jobs and continue with that. But the parallel side of it is that the ability to be able to reskill, retrain, and redeploy, and look for opportunities for when they can operate cross-border, right? Because essentially you're fundamentally working from home, and those ways of working have significantly changed. And we all know that, and enough spoken and talked about it, but it's real, and the way to conduct that, right? So that's a classic example, and it's also fulfilling for any HR leader to realize that you're able to maximize on capability of people and be sincere about it. The reality is that you're taking care of your own people, and there's payback. People reward you with that for the fact that you've been sincere about it and helping them grow in a difficult time and moving forward. It's a fabulous partnership, I would say.
Yeah, what's interesting, and I wonder if you both agree with this, when I think about the foundations of agility, so an organization's ability to react to any market dynamic, COVID being the most obvious example, we've seen foundationally the proficiency in having access and able to distribute data, having the technology in place to normalize that data, integrate it, and serve it to the stakeholders who need it, and then having the analytic skill to actually decision on it, all serve as the foundation. And we can see this right in the data set. So we can see that the companies with the least compliance issues are highly proficient in those three areas, which you'd kind of expect, right?
Yeah.
But what's also interesting is when we look at the companies that are sort of establishing competitive differentiation, are moving up the strategic ladder in their response to COVID, also have that foundation. So the ones that have done the work to have those components figured out seem to be reacting the most strategically to COVID right now. Would you agree with that?
100%. And it's actually an essential. There is no other way not to be able to. And you named about multiple sets of HR process. The only way to be able to respond back, and I think it's clearly a learning for every organization, is to be absolutely able to take that into the stride.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think of agility, some of the key drivers of agility being employee engagement, skill and development planning, a very strong talent acquisition and reward strategy, companies who are able to understand, or I should say measure, metrics of consequence, I'll call them, right, within these four areas, and be able to translate those metrics into insights for us to then be able to take action is absolutely critical. It's no longer nice to have, right? I think it's really a requirement. Which is why companies like SAP, not trying to sell here, but companies like SAP are employed, right? That's what we do, essentially.
And we partner along with together as well, Frank. So
exactly.
No, but that also brings us to the other point that I wanted to check with both of you and Chris as well. That historically, I mean, if you look at many of the other business functions, like let's say finance and business operations and sales teams, the foundation and the bedrock of it from an operating standpoint has been data, right? And in different forms and shapes. The tools usage could differ, from a company to company. The technology usage could differ from a company, but very, very clearly that's been at the front line, and it's just been the way organizations have operated, right? I mean, some would potentially use an Excel and do simple macros out of it, or there is R and Python and whatnot right now, right? But the point I wanted to also pick up is how does that translate across into the HR function? I mean, enough said, and we all know it. Many of us do it moving forward as well. How do you see the difference, Brian? I mean, any insights on how is that picking up into the market with people that you talk with, let's say, small and medium enterprises, the adoption rather?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like I mentioned at the top, regardless of company size, there's an acknowledgement that these, data, the ability to integrate, normalize, and distribute data, and then sort of analytics, almost unequivocally, everybody gets how important it is. But somewhere along the way, somehow the knowledge of its importance doesn't map to the action of actually building the foundation. And because we see it in the evolution, mid-tier is more proficient actually in sort of data analytics and technology than enterprise, which means that somewhere along the growth curve, there's some fragmentation and focus that's happening where the proficiency actually goes down as the company gets bigger. The thing I was going to throw back at you, we have practitioners watching this right now who know that they have that knowledge. They are a very quiet voice in a hurricane, trying to get people to pay attention that, hey, these foundational things need to be fixed, or we won't be as agile as we need to be, or we can't act strategically. Sometimes it's hard to connect the cost of getting those things in order with future value. I wonder what your advice would be to those practitioners to be able to sell internally that, hey, figuring out these kind of data analytics technology issues are really important to our strategic outcomes in the future, and how you get people to pay attention to that, because there's something happening where everybody gets it's important, but somewhere along the growth curve, it gets left behind for some companies. And I wonder how the people that know that it's important, can build a platform and a voice internally to get attention.
The best way to get internal buy-in is to showcase the value addition that you're doing. As far as I'm concerned, I can't have any conversation without data, whether it's culture, it's engagement, it's attrition, it's growth, it's degrowth. How do you even discuss any of these strategic topics without data? So data gets into the way you live and then the way you do your work. But what happens is, that especially in a large organization, I think it's a journey, right? You're implementing a huge ERP, whether it's Workday or any of those. And then on top of that, then you need certain specialized modules for, say, talent acquisition or succession planning or performance management. Then on top of that, you need analytics tool that give you better quality. Now in large organizations, I think you're somewhere on that journey. So to buy sophisticated tools almost feels like jumping the gun a little bit, because you need to fix some of the fundamentals and go one step at a time. In my experience, everyone gets it. It's just that you can't jump 4 steps on a ladder. You go next, and then you go next, and you go next, and then you keep getting better. That's my experience.
Charu, I couldn't agree more with you, by the way, on the value conversation, right? I think that's one thing we can take from our finance and operation colleagues who've kind of lived in this data world forever, and we're born in that space. I think for HR, we've made great strides, but I think we have to get much better at translating our strategies into value, right, and impact to the top and the bottom line. And I don't think it's only about the top and bottom line, so I don't misunderstand my comment. But I do think being able to present value to the organization and how it will impact results, performance results, I think is really important. I loved your point, Charu, on how do you move from point A to point B? It's not rip and replace, right? It doesn't have to be a monumental leap. I think the other piece you have to remember is there's enough flexibility in organizations out there who can help that will allow you to sort of try and buy, right, if you will, or even take more of a phased approach, if you will, right? Perfect example at SAP, when we acquired SuccessFactors and we launched SuccessFactors, we didn't rip out legacy SAP and jam in SuccessFactors. We actually took a hybrid approach. We took a pilot approach. We took a costless approach. And over time, we built in SuccessFactors to ultimately be our system of choice. And I think that's really important for HR. You don't have to eat the elephant in one bite, but certainly you've got to be able to paint the picture of value and obviously outline the roadmap on how you're going to get there.
No, absolutely. And I completely agree with both of you. I think the reality is to be able to then now come back and use information and really then make a small steps, like Charu mentioned. It's about making those very specific steps. But the important also point is to find those 1-2 few business problems that we are essentially wanting to solve. That's the critical element, really getting about it. What exactly are we trying to solve? It's not just about information and analysis of that information and sharing that, and it doesn't buy. I mean, fundamentally, if you look at CXOs, my business head, would really just want to understand what business value can come out of that insight. And that's the tricky bit for all HR practitioners to be able to take up and then be convinced about it. Of course, you've got to be able to do a lot of homework around it to then make the case for it and then take the steps. And, when you're able to present the value back onto it, and like Frank and Charu said, it's those small steps. Start it off with the pilot, showcase the business value that's coming across with, take it onto a larger pool.
The other thing I wonder would be worth clarifying or at least expanding on is when we talk about the concepts of value and trying to link a cost investment with a return of value to the organization. Again, as I think about practitioners watching this right now, I think it's also helpful to note that value comes in different forms. Like I think in business, we always immediately jump to some highly quantifiable value, which we should, but it's usually some sort of cost efficiency or top line. That's what finance is looking for, and ultimately those are the most powerful kind of levers of value. But there are other elements that we, with Safeguard Global, we've worked with clients where value has come in the form of things like the voluntary attrition level of the actual HR organization, where the HR organization wants to be a more strategic partner to their internal stakeholders, but they're actually just answer brokers. They're very tactically viewed within the organization. That's very frustrating to the people within HR, and they have a tough time keeping a hold of the talent. Well, when you have those foundational pieces figured out, suddenly those people can become more insightful. They can become thought leaders within the organization. They can provide strategic value to the rest of the organization, which also has value in and of itself. But we've seen the voluntary attrition rate of HR departments go down because suddenly the people are enjoying the work much more. Value could come in emotional ways where, anxiety goes down or frustration goes down for either people in the organization or the end employee. And that's what, we would call emotional value, not just rational value. So first, I wonder what you all think of kind of the different flavors of value, but I think it's important for practitioners as they think about how am I going to justify these costs, that they're also thinking about the different ways in which value can be communicated.
I think you're right, Brian, right? Value takes very different forms, right? You can look at it in terms of productivity. You can look at it in terms of cost of ownership. You can look at it in terms of health and well-being, right? Healthcare costs. I think that to your point, you can define value in very different ways. If I'm talking to a CFO and I'm trying to convince them, right, that no matter how you define it, right, it has to translate down or back to how am I going to drive growth at the top line?
How are my numbers going to move?
You got it, right? You got it, right? And if I'm talking to a CEO, right, obviously that's important, but it's really about how am I going to expand our brand, right, and our value in the market, right? And to your point, all of the things that we described and we talked about around employee engagement and brand presence, and there's a lot of things that we in HR impact and influence, which is fantastic. That has to be a part of the value proposition. But I really believe you've got to be able to translate it down at some point in time, right, to how is this going to help me drive growth in my organization?
Absolutely. And I think, it really boils down also back onto the teams. I made that point that, our own teams from an HR standpoint, then, get a lot more comfortable. It's about getting confident across playing with that information, and it's a significant power then back to be able to. And I wouldn't be surprised when you say, Brian, that the voluntary attrition levels coming down, because the reality is that as people teams start doing a lot more so-called value-based strategic work. There's meaning into the work that you're doing in the same set of HR processes, talent management, employee experience, leadership development, success and planning, looking at success profiles, turnover rates, each of those actions, payroll management, all of that has insights that one can be able to pick up. You look at queries, right? I mean, something historically that many HR teams used to be looking at and still continue in terms of, employee queries coming across to shared services. That's an absolute source of information to be able to draw analysis out of and change policies and benefits which are going to be tuned across to what's really making sense. And fundamentally, we put across onto a benefit strategy or a policy framework, which may be completely off the rails unless and until you're really analyzing the data and then going back and working onto it to make a correction.
Just for a second as well, I want to get, I know the audience are loving the conversation, but I want to get practical for a second for everyone. Could you share, from a practical sense, how you are, and I'd love to have this for everyone, how you are, for example, improving the data literacy within your own function? And what are those practical things that you're doing? Because I think everyone agrees. Everyone's saying, and now they're sitting there. What do we do, right? We've covered quite a lot. What are some practical things that we could do? So could you share, in your organizations, how you're improving that data literacy for not just your own team, but also your leaders? What does that look like?
Yeah. So one of the things, Chris, that we are trying to do is that, like I said, almost every conversation that we have is data-based that we have with the leaders, which means when we look at a problem and come up with a solution, we look at what the data is saying, what the insights can be derived from it, and then therefore what solutions can you come up with, and that is the culture that we're trying to build. And the team comes along and they study the data, they learn the data, and I follow the 70-20-10 principle. 70% you learn on the job, 20% you learn from others, and then 10% you learn from programs. So I don't think just sending people to data literacy programs makes a difference. It's about when you ask them to prepare data-based discussions and conversations is when they learn the best. I mean, it becomes part of your culture. I think at least where I've seen in the last couple of organizations, we are able to drive that culture and we are able to bring in the data. The challenge is that because our systems are not that developed, it just takes a lot of time to pull that data out. And it's like pulling teeth. So it's there, and we don't do very complicated analysis, to be honest. Fundamental data analysis is what we do, basic, but it's just getting the basic data in place is painful, and that's why people sometimes hate it. But when you build it as a way of life, then people just come along, and because they realize that's how you work here.
And maybe building on that, Charu, I think one of the things we're doing at SAP, and we have done, and I think we're probably about 3 years into our journey, is again coming back to that culture of curiosity, Chris. Right? We love to have fun, right? And we're really trying to drive that entrepreneurial spirit and innovation spirit. We've launched contests, we've launched think tank sessions, we've done Shark Tank events, right? We're really trying to build that culture of curiosity and defining real world problems, and then go solving them, right, with data. And I think that has really helped unlock our, I'll call it data fluency capability, right, within the organization. The other thing we've done, which I think has probably had the biggest impact, is we really have redefined performance management at SAP, and particularly in HR. Everything we do is aligned to KPIs, right? We very clearly understand what it is we're trying to accomplish, how it contributes to the organization overall, and every performance management conversation at every level aligns back to the overall mission, right? And the conversation is always around how are you contributing value? Coming back to your question, Brian, how are you contributing value to the organization, right? And that brings a very interesting and a sort of a forced conversation around analytics and data fluency. I really do think, though, it comes back to that culture of curiosity, and it's something we've gotten right. And honestly, COVID can distract us a little bit as we're so focused on trying to maintain and balance out work and life and the organization. But I think it's an opportunity for us now to maybe reignite our organizations.
Just getting to some really practical things that practitioners can do that we've worked with our clients. I'll just give you a few questions that, the first thing you have to do is take stock of where you are, right? So how evolved are you compared to your competitive set? How evolved are you, or how well are you catering to the employment market or your own employee base? So some very simple things you can ask yourself that will help you get a temperature check as to where you are as far as your agility, is how many HCMs do you have across all of your countries? If you have an HCM per country, you may be behind. What do the integrations look like, for all of your HCMs that you have to your centralized HCM? What do those look like? Are they Excel? Are they programmatic integrations? Are you normalizing the data? If you're not doing any of those things, you may be behind. What is what we call proximity of the data to the stakeholders? Does it take a long time for the people that need the information to get it and be able to act on it? If there's a lot of calories spent doing that and it takes a long time, you may be behind. So there are things that you can do to take stock that give you a temperature check as to whether you are sort of at a market standard or not. And if you're not, you need to start investing to get there.
And I think based on everything you said, you are behind. So, and if we've ever seen a time where that's more important, it's now, right, to have that data at our fingertips. We did our People Analytics Summit a few days ago, and one of the overarching themes there from the CHROs and People Analytics leaders is we need this data in the here and now. We can't have it a week later. A week later in this current landscape, the dynamics completely changed. Yeah. As we know, day to day, we don't know whether, it also feels like the business now is kind of putting more pressure on HR than ever for these insights, right? And literally, people's lives are at stake, literally. And we've never been in that position. The mental health and well-being of people as well. So there's never a time where investment is needed, and now is the time. If you're going to act at any point right now to kind of look to get that investment, this is the time to do so.
Absolutely.
And I think I cannot imagine any CEO or any organization hasn't realized the value of having people analytics and the data at their fingertips as well. I'm conscious of time as well, and thank you for all being very practical. And I think it really helped everyone as well, because starting that, like you said, Charu, starting those conversations with data, and obviously, Frank, as you said, making sure we have that culture of curiosity as well is super important. If there's sort of a parting takeaway you could give to everyone listening as some steps they can take or something they should focus on, what would that be? And then where's the best place for them to connect with each of you if they want to reach out? I think part of doing this, I really want to connect people together as well. So I'll start with yourself, Deepak.
No, absolutely. Love the conversation, Chris, and all of you. And very, very clearly, speed is is the power of it, right? I mean, it's if there's anything certain about the future, that it is uncertain. And to that extent, the ability to be able to work with speed is paramount. And at the same point of time, taking the steps, starting off with the pilot and playing it across, and having the trust and the culture that's built across the system and the teams is the next critical thing, right? So,
where's the best place to reach you, Deepak? LinkedIn?
LinkedIn.
Probably. Yeah. Probably we'll leave it at LinkedIn. Otherwise, you're going to get way too many emails. Don't give your email away. So I'm saving you from that. Charu?
Yeah, I would just say it sounds big, but actually working with data is you can do on a day-to-day basis. Like Frank said, if you have a curious mind, if you want to present a problem and a solution logically, you have to go with data. So it's no big deal. It's just taking a step every day in your work and any problem that you're trying to solve or anything that you're trying to do, try and look at data and you'll be able to get it. And then, of course, in the long run, the tools really help because it just makes the whole journey a lot easier and you can keep getting better. But it's not as big a deal as it's made out to be. It's fairly simple. Just put your head to it and you're able to sort of work with data. Best place to reach again, I think LinkedIn, and would love to catch up if anyone wants to.
Yeah, I'll round it out here. First of all, big thank you, Chris, and to my fellow panelists. Love the conversation today. We'd love to keep it going offline and stay connected. But I just wanted to maybe echo what Charu said, right? If you're in HR today, you do not need to become a data scientist to keep your job, right? And it sometimes feel a little Y2K-ish, right? We get crazy around trends, but it's going to be okay, I guess, is maybe the take-home message. And certainly the explosion of data analytics and IoT, AI, automation, et cetera, is going to continue. Embrace it. And at the end of the day, keep the customer at the center of everything you do, right? And certainly there are technologies that can help you to solve those customer challenges that you're trying to solve. And if you'd like to chat more about that or anything else we've talked about today, you can reach me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, thanks again, Chris, for the partnership. The panelists, thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. And I think, Chris, something you said bears repeating. There is a unique opportunity for setting foundational structure, and I think we're in it. So if it's not there and you're not able to act in a way that you want to, now would be the time to begin gathering your facts and selling that story. So I think that was a really critical point, that it's never too late, and we have an interesting period in the market right now where pivots and reconfiguration and investments are maybe more easily consumed by an organization than they would be at other points in time. So and then there are partners, wink wink, that can help you kind of structure that kind of stuff, but we won't go into that. I can be reached on LinkedIn or Brian Dames at safeguardglobal.com. And again, just want to reiterate, just love the partnership with HR leaders. Love having conversations with super smart folks like our panel today. So, thanks for the time. We really appreciate it.